Hi, I'm Scott Valentine. Today I'd like to show you one of my favorite new features in Photoshop CS5 Extended, which is the 3D Repoussé feature. Repoussé allows you to take pixel selections or vector information and turn it into a 3D object within Photoshop CS5 Extended. In this case, I'm going to take some text and composite it into this image that I found in the National Archives, and I will replace the marquee text across here with Photoshop CS5. So I've already got this text layer that I've applied a slight warp to. I'll go to the 3D menu, choose Repoussé and Text Layer, and let the application render my text and rasterize it. And when it's done, you'll see I have a 3D object created directly from my text, and I didn't have to go to another application or import a 3D object. Now that it's finished, you see we have an object that we can manipulate directly in Photoshop. The Repoussé dialog comes loaded with a handful of presets that you can apply simply by clicking on them. They'll affect things like the extrusion, the inflation of the front or back faces, and then you can go over here and apply materials, you can adjust a bevel, and you can change some of the scene settings such as lights, the camera view, render settings, or mesh quality. In this case, all I want to do is lower my depth of the extrusion just a little bit. And I'll do that by clicking on the depth name and dragging slightly to the left until I get the value that I want. And you'll see what we have is a fairly thin object now. That'll be just enough to cast some nice shadows. We'll center it again, click OK to accept it, and here we have our 3D object. Now in order for it to cast shadows, the shadows have to land on something, so we'll create a shadow catching layer. Creating a new layer, I'll fill it with black, return to the 3D menu, and create a 3D postcard from the layer. Now in terms of Photoshop, a 3D postcard is simply a three-dimensional plane that has really no depth. Its only purpose here is to catch the shadows from my other text layer. Now since the two layers are separate, they won't interact in such a way that I can catch the shadows. I have to merge them, and in order to do that, I have to combine their cameras and their positions. Then I'll select both layers, go to 3D menu, and merge. When it's done, you may have a hard time seeing where the plane is because of the background. We'll make that a little bit easier to see. Open up the 3D panel, select our mesh tools, select my 2D layer, my 2D plane, and rotate it until it's roughly perpendicular to the back face of my text. When I get it into the position I want, I'll scale it up just a little bit so that the text doesn't overlap it. There we go. We'll rotate the entire scene sideways so that I can bring the text and the shadow catching plane closer together. And when they've made it up pretty well, I'll select my Scene Object tool and rotate back to the front. There we go. Now the last thing to do here is to turn that plane invisible so that it doesn't hide the rest of our image. Now let's take a look and see what kind of shadows we get from that. And as the rendering pass goes by, you'll see the effect of having that object so close to my text. Right in these areas, you can see where the shadow is cast. Let's interrupt that. And now let's take a look at our image. And to save time, I've created a version of the image where the marquee text has already been cloned out using some of the brand new tools in Photoshop CS5. With my text layer still selected, I'm going to start off by setting up my camera. I know that I want a 14mm field of view, and we'll leave the camera about where it is now. We'll bring the object a little bit closer. And from here, it's just a matter of having a little bit of patience in order to get the object exactly where you want it. Now, in order to save time, I've preloaded a version of the text already that has been manipulated, scaled, and rotated into place. But before I get there, I just want to show you that we have indeed brought both of our objects along, and we can use this preview to figure out where we want our shadows. So go to our lights. I'm going to get rid of two of the lights because I don't need them. I want to simulate one flash that's slightly high and to the right. Use the visualization tool so that I can see where my light is. And I'll put it about where I want it, which will be here in front of the text. Whoops. There we go. Let's see how that looks. We'll just see where our shadows end up real quick. And that's looking pretty good. That's about the position that I want them in. The other thing that we can do is go back to our camera tool and we can set a depth of field blur. In this case, I will use 1.3. And I'll set my distance down to about 1.1. And you can see what happens now is that the shadows have become a little bit softer, and the effective distance is now visible as a blur on our text. Now those are the essential elements, but now that we have a 3D object, we can go in and manipulate the materials on each of these surfaces independently. We can change the hardness of the shadow on the light, and we can do a bunch of other cleanup work. So let me go ahead and jump ahead to the final version of where this text is being placed. And after a little bit of work, this is what I came up with. You can see that the shadows are a little bit soft on the edges. I've changed the front material to have some distressing, and I've left the depth of field on so that it gets a little blurry as you get further away from the camera. Now to finalize the effect, I've added a little bit of texture, and there we go. We've used brand new tools in Photoshop CS5 Extended to create a convincingly real new marquee from a very old photograph. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this and seeing what's possible. I really encourage everyone out there to go ahead and experiment as much as you possibly can and find new and unusual uses for these brand new tools. Thanks a lot. I'm Scott Valentine.